brings us to our Lake County Commissioners Workshop session. Anyone from the public wishing to speak on any topic before the commissioners, please feel free to step up to the microphone. We have no members of the public, nor do I see any members in the room that want to raise their hand and speak. Gentlemen, anything to discuss?
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
I want to address the continued misinformation that some politicians have put out about the tax relief that yourself, Commissioner Regovich, and I voted to give on property taxes by doubling the homestead exemption for low-income seniors, defined as those who have a household income of $40,000 or less, and the owner occupancy credit for homeowners who have seen historic double-digit increases in property taxes in Lake County and frankly in all of Ohio. And while this has been celebrated by the residents and taxpayers, unfortunately the bureaucrats who spend the money and spend more, and then they spend more money, and then they ask for more money and cry poor, unfortunately a lot of them have been passing around misinformation. And I'm aware that there was a presentation given by Fairport Harbor Schools where they say, and I quote, "In October 2025, the Lake County Commissioners voted to double the standard homestead exemption, effectively shielding $58,000 for qualifying individuals. This decision, quote, without any discussion with local governments, resulted in a loss of $6 million in tax revenue to Lake County schools. Fairport schools lost approximately $98,000. Now, there are two critical errors in that statement. Number one, there has been enormous amounts of public discussion, not just at commissioners' meetings and workshops, to which the public and school board members are always invited, but also, Commissioner Beveridge, you yourself hosted a county-wide meeting for all taxing authorities, and I believe over 100 people, including representatives from the Fairport Harbor area, attended. So it's simply not true to say without any discussion this was passed. In fact, there was an enormous amount of discussion, and we quite literally waited for the vote until the last commissioners meeting before the deadline under state law to give the maximum amount of time to receive input from school boards and cities and villages, and most importantly, taxpayers. So everyone was given a free and fair opportunity to contribute. Secondly, there wasn't a loss. Ultimately, what we did is reduced the increase in property taxes. Much as I wish I could say that after the commissioners voted to double the homestead and double the owner occupancy credit, that property taxes in the net went down. In fact, our calculations showed that we gave back less than a third of the $51 million tax increase we saw from the revaluation. So while I certainly wish we had been granted the authority to turn back time and completely wipe out that historic increase, in truth, I have to confess, we didn't. And so taxing authorities in Lake County walked away with tens and tens of millions of dollars more from property taxes than before. And so I think it's really important to correct the record on those two critical points. That number one, unlike some public entities that try to ram through tax increases and votes without public knowledge and emergency votes, the commissioners gave the maximum amount of time and opportunity for conversation, even going so far as to hold a town hall. We not only did that, but we were not able to reduce taxes in the net. We only had the authority that the state legislature gave us to double the homestead and owner occupancy. We couldn't go further. And so in the net, taxes still increased in Lake County. I wish we could have done more, but we did all we could do. So I just want to make sure that we push back on that misinformation so that when you hear from a politician, oh, my budget got cut. No, your budget is flush with cash. You have more money than before, and you should be looking at savings for the taxpayer, not crying poor. Ultimately, it's the taxpayer who still is dealing with a red line on their budget, and we need to keep doing more and lobbying our representatives and senators in Columbus to make the taxpayer whole.
You got anything on this, Morgan?
Well, yes, I want to say I was at the public meeting and there was a lot of dialogue and discussion, so absolutely I was there. I spoke myself, and that was before I was a commissioner. I went there as a township trustee to talk about that. I've been engaged on that issue, as will be coming up mid-year to have a decision on so I'll be casting a vote on whether we maintain that deduction or not. And look, the reality of it is, Commissioner Plechnik's correct. There were big increases and so forth. And the other side of the coin is there's a lot happening. There's a lot of reform. Most of how this works, I know people get very frustrated with property tax, and I've seen folks speak to township trustees, and the lion's share of this effort is at the behest of the state legislature. The state legislature decides how counties and entities levy taxes. So asking township trustees, particularly, that was my former role, to do something, there isn't anything for them to do necessarily, because they don't write the tax law in the state of Ohio. The legislature does. That said, now that I'm a county commissioner and have a little bit more of a lever to pull, I've been engaging even at a more significant level with the state legislatures. It is obvious that more and more changes are coming. And at some point, I think it's important in the property tax conversation, or the income tax conversation, and whatever it is as far as that goes, is that, and we talked about it earlier during the meeting with with cutting down or dissolving the Family and Children First Council, but then having a discussion about how those services are still delivered. And I think it's our responsibility to efficiently deliver services in government. But a lot of this conversation about lowering the cost of government and so forth is going to change how your counties, cities, villages, townships, park districts, and schools deliver their service. So if we're going to cut services and we're going to lower the tax burden, I think people need to prepare for how things look differently, whether it's different school districts, whether it's how communities share services. Those are all be conversations that we're going to need to have in order to make that work if we're going to fundamentally restructure how taxes are paid in the state of Ohio. I'm glad to be part of a contributor to that conversation. I'm excited for the opportunities that are there, but there is a lot of work to make this work efficiently.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate things that I've said before at that town hall meeting and with other people at these commissioners meetings. We are tasked as county commissioners to make decisions county-wide. The piggyback of the homestead and the owner occupancy cannot be selectively applied to one municipality or one type of entity, just the schools or without the schools. We had to make decisions across the board on all of those. And so I understand that some of these decisions impact others more than others, right? Commissioner Plechnik is correct. This was a reduction of the increase. My last calculations, the owner occupancy and the piggyback carved out about $14 to $15 million of tax relief, and the increase from 2024 to 2025 was north of 50, somewhere in the 52 to 54 million dollars. Now, not all entities saw an increase with the reevaluation, right? Some don't. There are some entities that don't get an uptick. They're not inside millage, or they're not on a 20 mil floor or off a 20 mil floor, whatever those things are, right? So some of these entities may not have seen that increase. And so we may have been dialing back. I certainly don't think that we were dialing back anything that was catastrophic to a budget. We also ran the numbers, we built a spreadsheet. We also looked at the numbers as how it applied to the overall budgets, not just on the property taxes, but the overall budgets. Average of 1.5% or so, 2% to some of these entities. And I have continued to work and beg for entities to continue to find efficiencies and ways to save a point or two here or a point or two there. I don't believe that there is a 20% savings, a magical silver bullet or silver buckshot, if you will, that's going to do that. But I think that we can stack 2% on 2% on 2%. And I know that there are entities in this county doing that. I know that there are school districts that are finding ways to save 1%, 2%, 3% here. I know that there are school districts that are already cutting their expenses before this happened. And so we had the difficult decision of making a county-wide decision. You know, we had the difficult process of doing that for county-wide. And I stand by the decision we made, and I continue to stand by the fact that at the end of the day, we are presented, as you pointed out, we are presented with what the Ohio legislature allows us to do. And we chose to ask all entities to figure out a way to work with 2% less so that homeowners and senior citizens on limited incomes could have some tax relief. And I don't think that that is too big of an ask. And yes, Commissioner Pleshnik, I am disappointed with some of the misinformation that mischaracterizes the process, that mischaracterizes what we did. And I would, you know, if you don't think that I don't get extremely frustrated and mad at other elected officials or other government entities and how they conduct their business, then I don't know, maybe I haven't been vocal enough, but I do get frustrated, as we all do. But we have an opportunity to work together and do the work of the people, and I don't believe that spreading lies or laying the blame at somebody else's foot gets that work done. I don't think there's a magical solution here. I don't pretend to think that I'm the smartest thing since sliced bread that came along and said, oh, I got the solution that's going to solve school funding, which has been a problem in this state for 30 plus years. And there is not a conversation about property taxes that does not have to be rooted in how do we pay for our schools. And it is the Ohio Constitution, Article 6, Section 2, that says it is the responsibility of the state to pay for public education and that no religious sect shall have any entitlement to that money. Right? So we have a school funding issue that has now become into a property tax issue. I don't believe that there is one solution. I don't believe that Columbus is to the blame. I don't think that Columbus can cut 20% of their budget. I don't think they could cut 10% of their budget. But we need Columbus to work with the local school districts and the other local entities. If everybody came up with 2 to 5% of solutions, all right, well, we got 3 or 4 different areas that we could combine those to find 10 or 20%, and I think that's a solution. And I just feel that coming out, blaming others, and pointing out the flaws, and, well, they're doing this, or they did this, so therefore I don't have to do any hard work, is not going to get it done. As much as that's easy and fun to say and gets you likes on Facebook, I think that we need to do a better job of sitting down and having conversations and saying, here's where I'm frustrated. What can I do to help?
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to, I want to either clarify something you said or sort of add something. I agree with you on the magic bullet theory, the idea that you could take a $20 billion, $24 billion draw on the state and then cut 20%. You still need to. But let's remember that property tax collection doesn't go to the state. Those are local dollars. Those are your park districts. Those are your education. Those are your cities, villages, townships, all of that, right? I think there's a lot of folks that look at the property tax thing and they see Columbus, they see the state legislature, and I think they understand or feel that is, if the state gets their budget in order, this property tax thing will go away. The problem is property taxes come to local government. I think not everybody understands that. So I just want to make sure that, and I think you're right, 20% is a huge number to get. It's probably unrealistic. So there's still a massive amount of funding that's needed for that stuff. Or the consequence is those services will change.
And my preference would still be to have local control. I do not want Columbus dictating the quality of my schools. I do not want Columbus dictating the first responders that we have in our community, what their response times is, how many, how they're paid, how they're treated. I don't dispute that they have an obligation to pay. And I will say I do not agree with the current funding formula as to how it is applied. I do not agree with the current voucher system as to how it's applied. But that's not to say that we just blow up the whole thing. And not that the property tax conversation is blowing up the whole thing. I think that everybody needs to work together and find their part of the solution to help bring it to a bigger piece. So, sir.
Mr. President, I think it's important to note, as you say, well, I'm not sure if Columbus could cut 20 or 10% from their budget. It should be highlighted that we have multiple candidates and multiple state legislators who are on the record saying that their goal in the very near future is to abolish the state income tax, which brings in over $10 billion a year, or about 10% of the state budget. So we have legislators, we have gubernatorial candidates who say that is entirely doable with their current budget. So I would push back on the idea that 10 or 20% could not be cut from Columbus's all funds budget. There are state reps and senators who say it can be done. There are gubernatorial candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy who say it can be done. And I think looking at the numbers and realizing that the 2020 budget was about $67 billion and the 2026 budget is 100 and some, even going back to 5-6 years ago, we had a 30% less budget. We'd spent less than $30 billion statewide. So I actually don't think it's unrealistic to look at 10 or 20% savings. The question is, what's our priority? Is our priority cutting the income tax? Is our priority cutting the property tax? Is our priority giving $600 million to the Browns or $100 million to the Cavaliers or Guardians? Or is our priority giving targeted tax relief to seniors on a fixed income? There's a lot of different ways that we can direct tax policy in Ohio, and we have the resources to do it. The other thing that I want to supplement or clarify is that the state does get the bulk of our property taxes because schools are not local government. They are state government. They are run by the state. They are required to be funded by the state. And so it's not appropriate to say that the 60 to 70% of property taxes, depending on what district you live in, goes to local government. That money goes directly to the state schools, which are the responsibility of and run by the state. And so they do have a very, very intense interest in this discussion, even though they like to say we don't collect any property taxes. Well, it's true. Treasurer Zurin collects the property taxes, but he then remits 60 to 70% of it to the state in their state schools, which once again, they are required to fund, and they legislate and control in terms of curriculum and everything else under the sun. So we have to be mindful of the fact that the state does receive the majority of our property taxes, and that it used to be that schools were funded differently. If you look back to 1932 when the state sales tax was first adopted, it was supposed to be spent for three things: alleviation of poverty, funding public schools, and the local government fund. But the state kept the money. So they adopted the income tax. And they promised this time it'll be for public schools. This time it'll be for the local government fund. John Kasich took the money back from the local government fund, and schools continued to see their subsidy from income tax cut when the lottery was adopted, which once again was supposed to be the panacea to fund public schools. But as soon as it was approved, the state cut the general fund subsidy from income tax by the exact amount that the lottery brought in, meaning that functionally, who kept the money? It was the state legislators in Columbus. So it's really important for us to understand that yes, the state could cut 10 or 20%, at least according to them. They could cut that out of their budget. And in fact, we know that the state budget was more than 30% less 5-some years ago. So we've seen a historic ballooning of spending from our friends in Columbus. These are doable. But we can't do everything. We can't give billions of dollars to sports teams and data centers and relief for seniors. We can't cut the income tax to zero and cut property taxes to zero. So I admit there's not a magic money tree, and we can't be all things to all people. But what I have heard for the last 3 years as commissioner, number one complaint, number one concern is people being taxed out of their homes. And when you look at the very sad population trend of Ohio losing 1 or 2 congressional seats every census, we are shrinking relative to our sister states. If we want to reverse that trend, we're going to have to cut taxes in a big way. And I don't think that cutting taxes for millionaires is going to do it. We have to cut taxes for the rank and file, for the workers, for the unions, for grandma and grandpa, for young families. Otherwise, those people are going to leave. They're going to go to lower tax states, as they have been for decades, like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and Ohio will have seen its best days. Or we can come together We can acknowledge that this is a problem where we have to choose our priorities. We can't have everything. And we need to choose tax relief for those who need it most.
It's funny, and I agree. I don't think there's a magic solution for all states when it comes to taxes either. You mentioned states like Florida and Texas, right? We are not Florida or Texas, thankfully. Disney World produces something like $7 billion in taxes. $3 billion in local taxes just from Disney World, right? We don't have a Disney World.
And I'm told that a third of that comes from Judge Michael DeLeon's regular trips.
Well, him and others, that's true. And so, Florida, once again, a sales tax in Florida, how many people go down to Florida and vacation there and spend money there? And the tourism is a far larger thing. And it's a peninsula. The vast majority of the people in Florida live within 2 miles of the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. They're not going to their neighbor states.
The Gulf of America.
Once again, okay. They're not going to their neighbor state to spend money, right? You don't have the competition. It's not that they can drive 45 minutes to Erie or to Pennsylvania and buy something with less. So, if Texas, they have this little black liquid down there that kind of bankrolls everything they want. So, I do think that there's a combination of all three. I don't see that getting rid of one or the other is, once again, going to be the best solution. But I hope that we can come to a way through, like I said, everybody chips in 2 to 3, 4%. All 4 or 5 entities get around. We can find a 20% some places. So, Sheriff, I would you like to come in on this topic, or do you have something else you'd like to discuss, sir?
Question.
Yes,
On
sir.
some different topic.
Yes. Do you want to come to the microphone so that we can
No.
get it recorded for
No.
all time? Okay. No. Sorry.
By the way, now I know your nickname is Millbrook 2. Best thing since sliced bread. But
Yes.
anyways. You held a open meeting at Lakeland Community College on data centers, where a lot of information was presented, good things about data centers, bad things about data centers. It has been proposed for a data center to be built in Perry Village. My question to you is, has the commissioners, because as sheriff that patrols that area, sort of been a blackout of information, whether that is being constructed or not, where it is in that process. There's not anything that comes out of the village council with information regarding that. Has the commissioners heard anything? Is there a data center being built there, or is there not? Do you have any information as commissioners?
Would either of you like to answer this question, or would you like me to handle this? I believe we were approached. I think our LDA was approached last year sometime about the proposed project. There's 200 some acres under contract through Perry Village. I believe the township, I believe the JED, also out in Perry, had a portion of land. All three have combined for this proposed purchase. There was a due diligence process that was going on by the proposed buyer with the intent of building a data center. There were some things that needed to be done ahead of time, a gas well, soil samples, stuff like that. They also need to do an energy analysis to see if they have the ample energy to be able to build it there. To the best of my knowledge, they are still in a due diligence process. There's also some deed restrictions on the land that I think still need to be addressed. You referenced last week, I believe, was the Lake County Development Council had a luncheon involving data centers. I had the privilege of being the moderator of a panel discussing the opportunities and challenges that come along with data centers, not only here in Lake County, but statewide. And yes, nobody says they're an expert on data centers, and I don't think there is an expert on all the different parts that come into this conversation, whether it be land use management, whether it be the water, whether it be pollution, whether it be energy consumption, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is a very big and difficult conversation. one of the individuals there brought up that communities that want to do this right need to think about doing community benefit agreements where, let's say us as a county, come together and say, if you'd like to build a data center here, here are the things that we would like to see. We would like to see internal water cooling systems where it's a closed loop system that doesn't then pollute our Great Lakes. We'd like to see a plan for how you're going to consume the energy. Are you going to bring in a natural gas plant? Are you going to increase nuclear output to, whatever energy you're bringing in? Are you bringing that to the grid, or et cetera, et cetera? And so abatements, infrastructure, increased traffic, et cetera, right? So I think that I'd like to probably move forward and start to have that conversation, because the other side of it is the developers, right? I'm going to make a generalization, maybe it's incorrect, but I feel like these developers are trying to take advantage of situations. Townships and villages, townships specifically, don't have, and Morgan back me up on this, maybe I'm wrong, townships typically don't have all the rules and laws and regulations that a village or a municipality or a city would, right? In Ohio, that's typically sometimes how we've had it explained.
Probably not. I think it would depend on the township.
And maybe it's...
So you're going to get into some of the Lake County, there could be even disparity between the Lake County townships, right? You have a community like Leroy, which is probably what a lot of people think of a township, is very rural in orientation, minimal just about everything, but then its neighbors, you have Concord Township and Painesville Township that are a little bit more, and then you can go out to Perry and it's going to be different there, right? Both Concord and Painesville Township are home rule, so they're going to act a little bit more like a city.
Okay.
And because of their numbers, they're probably going to behave. You get Union Township, which is double Mentor, almost double the size of Mentor, so they're going to probably be very robust. So it's going to run the spectrum.
I say that because it almost feels like some of the data centers are like proprietary lending, where they're going into the more rural, less populated areas and getting deals done and getting contracts done. Then afterwards, everybody realizes what was going on and then stuff like that. And that's where I feel that if we were to come together with a community benefit agreement, let's, just like economic development, just like workforce development, I went to the city of Mentor, State of the City, where they're going to Europe and having these conversations about bringing in economic development here. Go out to the data centers and say, hey, we've got a roadmap for how to get it done here fast, effectively, so that it's beneficial to everybody. I would hope to see it move that direction. But specifically with the project in Perry, I don't know where the buyer is. I think they're still doing their due diligence. There's obviously many conversations that need to be had. My disappointment, sir, lies with, I think, part of the behavior of the former council and mayor in that village. There was a zoning ordinance that was passed. And once again, what I'm about to say has nothing to do with my opinion on data centers. What I'm about to say has to do with my opinion on what good government looks like and what the obligation we have to our residents is. And that is, there was a zoning change that was put forth in summer of last year, early summer. There was a referendum where the voters got together and said, we do not want this. We want this taken off. We want the opportunity to vote against this or vote for it. We just want more time and education. When the referendum was filed, the council then immediately rescinded that zoning change as to appease the residents involved. Subsequently, they then scheduled a couple months later a special hearing and a special council meeting that had 5, I believe, resolutions on there, one of which was a zoning amendment that talked about an overlay district, that talked about this is just cleaning up some zoning issues that we saw, trying to protect the community. They had the public hearing just before. The information was provided at the last minute. Questions were asked. Their solicitor asked that the public not question council, that was not appropriate for a public hearing. This was just to hear opinions. It then went to the council meeting. The planned amendments, to the best of my knowledge, I do not believe went through a planning commission. They were discussed and come up with in an economic development committee, which I do not believe is a public meeting required with the same notifications. But at any rate, even if I'm correct and incorrect on that, the resolution in the council meeting was then waived. They chose to waive and declare an emergency for the 3 readings, which would have given the public time to look into this and voice their opinion. And I just don't understand how a zoning amendment can be declared an emergency when the zoning's been in place for, I don't know, 50, 60 years, but now it's an emergency. And you and I were both criticized on our concerns about that village's optics, about listening to the voters, about listening to the residents, and how we need to be more transparent. And this is just a grotesque example of trying to hide something and not bring the public input into the process. And I'm thoroughly disappointed, and I don't know what that has to do with the process. I know that zoning ordinance change, that overlay district now allows for data centers in what's considered to be light industrial zoned areas, which, as I'm being explained, now paves the way to be able to do this. And so knowing that a referendum was filed and that the community wanted more engagement and education, and then just repackaging it and shoving it through is a problem for me that I'm not going to sit quietly about, because once again, I have to make decisions and try and help them serve the entire county. So I'm frustrated with the process. I do not know exactly where it is, but we will continue to update the community, because I have had other residents reach out to me and are concerned about what not only Perry Village residents, Perry Township residents, and North Perry residents, and Painesville Township, and community-wide. And I think that lunch we had a week ago from the Lake County Development Council shows that it is a community-wide issue, that people are concerned about this. So, sorry.
Well, follow up to that for the commissioners, I think it's important if you went to that meeting that was held at Lakeland, Ohio is the focal point, it seems, for data center development because of environmental conditions, water availability, all those things that were stated. And there is a need for power, and there's not enough power. So there's talk of building micro power plants. It was talked that Perry is a prime target to expand on their area to add additional power, micro nuclear power to that area. I think it's important that the commissioners maybe lead a group to look at how do we want data centers to be in Lake County, because it is an economic impact. It also is an impact on safety forces, an impact on infrastructure. You mentioned at the very beginning what you were saying, and that's what brought it to my mind. To have a plan, this is what we expect from data center development, and this is what we need as a county moving forward to come up with a better collaborative effort by the county rather than just small jurisdictions making those decisions that impact the future here.
I agree. Yes, Auditor Galloway was happy to point out that Ohio is primed for the opportunity of recruiting data centers. His analogy had something to do with, when you're the best looking girl in school, you don't need to lower your standards just to get dates. I reminded him that if that didn't happen, I would have never been married. So I disagree with Auditor Galloway there. So, gentlemen, anything else?
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
I would only add to this discussion in saying we sometimes need to go back to first principles, which is that no business is all good or all bad, all bad, data centers included. And the first principle for local government is that the people should decide. And so it's always troubling to me when an entity tries to ram something through, tries to hide something or have a lack of transparency, because at the end of the day, it should be up to the people. I may want to have a data center in my community and you may not. And ultimately, if a majority of the people say yes or no, that should be respected. But you don't get that kind of feedback from the community when you sneak something through. So I want to reiterate that we have to be respectful of each community and what they want, because ultimately we should decide what's in our backyard and what's in our neighborhood. And to that point, I want to sincerely thank the sheriff for his daughter's service on the planning commission, because she's taken some very public stances on these controversial issues, and she's taken a lot of heat for it. But because of that, she's given a voice to a lot of people in Perry and around Perry that really weren't represented. And I know it would have been a lot easier for her to say nothing, but she very boldly represented her neighbors, and I think that needs to go on record.
Okay. Anything else? Seeing none, that'll bring this county commissioner workshop to a close. Thank you.